Good evening. Welcome to Fate Matters. I am David Hennessy. My guest today is Aidan Byrne, although I should really say I'm his guest in his lovely home in the beautiful County Carlow. Aidan is a Bachelor of Divinity and holds a Master of Arts degree in Catholic Applied Theology. He is actively involved in St. Patrick's Prayer Group, which is a committed lay Catholic apostolate established by Noel and Eileen Byrne, focused on the ministry of healing and liberation. Both Aidan and his wife live by providence and are engaged on a full-time basis in the apostolate of healing and liberation. Aidan has addressed retreats, seminars, and conferences for priests, religious, and laity throughout Ireland and the UK, Fatima, Finland, Sweden, and in various parts of Asia and Africa. He is an experienced lecturer and has lectured at the Pope Leo XIII Institute in Chicago. As an experienced international speaker, Aidan has a clear understanding of the destructive consequences of engagement with New Age practices and occult practices for religious life, as well as for Christian families and communities. Well, Aidan, thank you so much for inviting me to your home, this beautiful part of the world. Aidan, tell me about your life before you met the Lord.
Thank you, David. My focus just all down through the years was actually on business development. I come from a farming background. I grew up on a farm. And but around 1999 or thereabouts, I went into information technology for a number of years and got involved in various jobs and tasks over several years. But with the advent of the Celtic Tiger, suppose like so many other people, it just intrigued me at the time. All the success that I was seeing in many other people's lives just became an increasing source of fascination, and the desire for wealth creation just grew and grew and grew in me. So in about 2004, an opportunity arose to go to a conference in London, of all places. And there was a man going to be speaking that weekend called Tony Robbins. And the title of the conference was Unleash the Power Within. So there were several other people with whom I was connected at that particular time in my life that all had an interest in that area of making as much money as possible and finding ways to make money. And we saw this as offering the opportunity, the potential to be able to do just that, to unleash the power within. And we arrived in London to realise that there was about 10,000 people in one room, gathered in that room on the London Docklands. And a big stadium, essentially, a warehouse. And Tony Robbins came out on the stage and spent that afternoon just speaking to us, not in a high-pitched voice, but just speaking. It was only afterwards that I realised what he was actually doing, but I'll come to that in a moment. And at a particular point on that Friday evening, he put up on the big television screens all over the area, all over the room basically, what was being prepared for us outside. And essentially what was going on, it's not very environmentally friendly, but a huge amount of fires burning as they were preparing an area that at the end of the day, 10,000 of us were led out to walk in our bare feet across burning hot coals. And it was probably about 20 or 30 feet. And I did it 3 times. And what was done to us was we were prepared through deep hypnotic induction and through an area that he calls neuro-associative conditioning, which is actually another form of neuro-linguistic programming. And that's what he used on us. All day Saturday, half a day Sunday. They worked on us, he worked on us, and just one speaker, minute after minute, hour after hour, through the whole weekend. And we were introduced to all sorts of new concepts, which I'd only heard of, but was not familiar with. Clairvoyance, divination, astral projection, all sorts of different ideas and notions we got to practice on each other over the course of the weekend as well. And on the Sunday afternoon, he warned that at a particular time, the doors were going to be closed on this massive big room, this big warehouse. Anybody who was outside wouldn't be able to get in. Anybody inside couldn't get out. And so I was inside, and I was delighted to be inside with all of these people, my friends and all these other people in the room as well. It was the most eerie experience that I would say I have ever gone through in my entire life. He mixed all sorts of different religions, Christianity with Buddhism, with Hinduism, with other notions of religions, world religions as well. And over the course of probably an hour at least, and maybe a few hours, probably an hour or more, but the screeches and the howls of people as all sorts of manifestations were actually going on around the room just at that particular time. It was just literally, you could feel the goosebumps, the hairs rise on the back of your neck, basically, with what was actually going on. But I came away from it exhilarated, excited, tremendously excited with what I had learned over the weekend, what I had experienced over the weekend, and I wanted more. And I remember trying to share the experience with my wife Eileen, as I did on numerous occasions, but she could never grasp it. She could never get a sense of it. There was no desire for anything that I was sharing with her, just in and around this. She didn't understand it. And that was a source of frustration at various stages for me over the following few years. But I persevered, and I decided I wanted to learn what that guy had, what Tony Robbins had. I wanted to do that in terms of the ability so as to be able to, as I understood it at the time, to help other people. So within a short time, what I did was I signed up on a course to learn neuro-linguistic programming. And that course, it involved neuro-linguistic programming, hypnosis, and timeline therapy, 3 disciplines essentially. Received a home pack to be able to study at home, and then spent some time away as well on a course learning it. And when I went through it, I was delighted. I was excited. And as well as that, as part of the process of hypnosis and learning hypnosis, we were taught how to hypnotize ourselves with a pendulum. I only realized afterwards that that's divination. But I became completely obsessed with the practice, with the pendulum and the use of the pendulum just over time. And then an opportunity for a second level on that program. I did go back to the Tony Robbins program again, spent another weekend on wealth creation, or wealth mastery it was called, the second program, at considerable cost, by the way. All of this, everything to do with the New Age and the occult, is all about money. Money, power, control, domination and manipulation. But anyway, I signed up then to become a master practitioner of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, hypnosis and timeline therapy. Now, NLP, what it's about, our neurology, it's learning how to control it, but also to control other people's neurology, other people's vision of the world, using language, linguistics, programming, treating people the same way. I mean, there's computers in this office where we're sitting here at the moment, treating people like computers that can be reprogrammed essentially, linguistically through language, by getting into them, getting into their minds, getting into their hearts. We see that today in many stage shows up and down the country with these so-called artists, basically, who use this to make huge amounts of money and introduce people. And people are signing up by the tens of thousands to go just to be entertained, titillated for a night, basically, at considerable cost, making lots of money for these people, not realizing what they're opening their minds and their hearts and their families to, and the consequences, the dire consequences that comes from this. So I participated in this. But through the practice of divination over time, and everybody's experience just of getting involved in these programs is quite different. And but my experience in relation to it was that I became obsessed with the pendulum, and to the extent that I felt at one stage that I was being informed that I was that I had healing abilities. So to find out more about this, I went to an angel card reader who confirmed that I did indeed have healing abilities and that I should go to develop those abilities. And I ended up then with somebody who trained me in an area called light working, which is very similar to Reiki and to bioenergy and these related practices as well. So I became a medium, a psychic, and a clairvoyant. I was getting deeper and deeper involved just in all of this while training in the areas of NLP and hypnosis and the related activities as well. And the doors were constantly opening just in and around this. But as I say, the harm that it was actually doing just on the family in terms of I became more and more isolated, shutting myself off from the family, engaging in meditation. And I had begun to learn areas similar to forms of meditation. It would be similar to transcendental meditation. And there's another American guru that was involved in some of these related areas as well. So I'd be shutting myself off here. And there's a lot of books around us at the moment, but that time the books that were on the shelves were increasingly around psychic development, astral projection, all the different areas of healing and hypnosis and related activities and what have you. More and more books coming in. And I did around 2007, I had a very frightening experience. I projected out one night this healing to a person, and I woke up during the night with this incredible fear. Just something came against me, like something was trying to get in at me, running from the top of my head down to the tips of my toes. And it was so frightening, and it came on so fast. I'd never had an experience like it before. I woke my wife up, and for the first time, I asked Eileen to pray the rosary with me, that we would actually pray the rosary to make it stop. And it didn't stop, but we did pray the rosary in the middle of the night. And when I went back to inquire of the people that I was engaged with and working with, basically at the time, they said, "Oh, you did it wrong. There was other ways that you can mitigate against these sort of things happening, basically." And the explanation that was given just in and around that. Now, part of the activity that I had engaged in was trying to help people with certain mental disabilities as well, as in schizophrenia. And but part of the discipline of neurolinguistic programming and hypnosis in these areas is that people like people that are like themselves. So you'll do this matching to try to get into the person, to get into their psyche, to get into their minds, basically. But the idea is that you do it cross, obviously, a mismatch, so that you're not getting straight in. And so I was told I was doing that wrong. And so, I mean, this might sound way out there, like aliens, basically, but it's not. It is actually very real in terms of, you find it in the scripture, actually. And if you look at a godly relationship, right, 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 1-5, the soul of David was knit to the soul of Jonathan because of the godly relationship that they had. So there was a knitting, there was something good actually taking place, something wholesome, something blessed that God was anointing in that situation. But in the book of Sirach, chapter 13, verse 1, it says, "Touch tar and it will stick to you." So you see, there are ungodly relationships, and you find it also, for example, with St. Paul, and he explains just in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33, "Do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals." And then verse 34, "Come to your right mind and sin no more." And just in that when we get into the wrong sort of company, there's doors that are being opened, and they were being opened basically within my life, but I still didn't get it, even after that night, that experience that night, because the rationalism that was entering in, the way in which that, oh, you weren't doing it the right way, there's another way of doing this. So I persevered. I stuck with it, and I was going deeper and deeper in my master practitioner training and being trained in the related areas around mediumship and bioenergy work and that particular activity as well. And then my daughter had an accident. She was only 5 years of age, and she broke her leg. And it was a particularly severe accident, but she suffered incredibly. And this is one of the things that I think that's just important to explain to your listeners as well, that there is a value, there is a meaning, there is a significance in suffering. As Christians, we understand we're not into prosperity gospel. That's not of God. What we're into reality, we're into God. And within God, I mean, look at the suffering of his own son, Jesus, what he actually went through that we might be saved. But we have to work out our salvation with fear and trembling, as it says in the scriptures. But she suffered. And you find it as well in Psalm 8, that out of the mouths of infants and babes. And she suffered for 3 weeks, excruciating pain, the most excruciating pain. She came home in a body cast, but still the leg wasn't knitting the way that it should. And I was continuing with my studies just around yes.
Aidan, I'd like to ask you about that. You evidently are pointing to a link between what happened to her and what you were involved in. Am I right there?
Well, I would say that the link really is that in the book of Job, chapter 36, verse 15, he delivers the afflicted by their affliction and opens their ears by adversity. What better way to gain access? And this might sound harsh, but through the suffering of a family member. It wakes us up to other realities. And the other reality that I'm getting at here is, I'm not saying that the Lord took out vengeance on my daughter. Some people might pick it up that way. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that through a course of events, the Lord permitted the suffering of a child and the suffering within a family, right, to bring healing, deep inner healing into a family. And in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 1 and 2, since therefore Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves with the same thought. For he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, so as to live in the flesh, no longer by the human passions, but by the will of God. I'm not saying that my daughter was sinning. I'm saying that it woke us up to other realities here, basically, within the family. And it was my wife that was actually wakened up, because it was my wife that slept on the floor for 3 weeks in the hospital beside her bed, basically. It was my wife who was praying and interceding for me while I was involved in this occult and New Age activities. It was my wife who persevered patiently. It was my wife who could have suggested I go and see a psychiatrist when I seemed to be going out of my mind and becoming a lunatic because of what I was actually engaged in. But she persevered, and she chose to pray instead of suggesting the medical route basically for me. And I would say thanks be to God. Because in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 14, the unbelieving husband is consecrated through the believing wife. The unbelieving wife is consecrated through the believing husband. Otherwise your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. My daughter is holy. And what the Lord was allowing, he was allowing the chalice of suffering basically to be passed into the family, not as a punishment, but as a means best to call us back to himself. And that is my point really in relation to suffering. It's the reason that Pope St. John Paul II, and I hope I'm not speaking too fast, just slow me down if I am. I get excited with the word of God at times, and it just drives me on. But anyway, Pope St. John Paul II, he wrote an apostolic letter called Salve Fici Dolores. And it's basically dealing with the value and the meaning of human suffering. And it is a tremendous work. And I would say from an ecumenical point of view, even for our friends just of other denominations, basically, spend time to read it, look at it, because we are living in a culture of death at the moment. And it's the breath of life that Pope John Paul II actually breathed just into our meaning, into our understanding of suffering, just through his writings, just in that particular article. But however, when my daughter came home from the hospital and she was in the body cast, one day my wife and my mother-in-law, Lord have mercy on her, went down to our local chapel here in the village. And my daughter was in a buggy. And in front of a statue of the Blessed Virgin, my wife just looked down at my daughter and says, "Ask Holy Mary to fix your leg." And with childlike simplicity, she looked up at the statue and she said, "Holy Mary, will you please fix my leg?" And next thing, she says, "Mammy, the lady said yes." And you see, Jesus is the only healer. We know that. We accept that. But it was Our Lady's intercession through the request of a small child The lady said yes. And it's not that my daughter heard Our Lady speak. She just saw Our Lady manifest, just a nod 3 times. And a few days later, the cast came off. Praise you, Jesus, and thank you, Jesus. Our daughter was restored. And then the next stage, just in relation to it, and I was continuing on with what I was doing, right, with my formation and learning around all this New Age. I still didn't get it. Because you see, going back to Romans chapter 1, verse 26 down, right, it's the spiritual blindness that comes with engagement and involvement in all of these practices. But my wife went to Medjugorje, and she spent 10 days, and she didn't see anything in terms of spinning suns or any of the things that people talk about out there. She just used that time to pray for me, for her husband. And when she came back after a few weeks, I heard there was a prayer meeting in Carlow coming up, and that there was supposed to be a speaker on the topic of family tree healing. And in my arrogance, I said to myself, well, sure, seeing that I'm a healer, sure, I'll go along and see what he has to say, and I might be able to offer some lights just around that. So I went to the prayer meeting, and the speaker didn't turn up. And instead they prayed the Rosary and the Divine Mercy Chaplet. And then they began praising God. And then they began singing in tongues. And I was convinced that there was 5 of them possessed. And all I could see was just these people, as far as I was concerned, they were possessed. And they were caught up by God, by the Lord. The problem wasn't with them, it was with me. And the next day, I just went home completely confused, disorientated, agitated, right? Because the spirits that had entered in, and I mean the demonic, basically, that entered into my life through my activities, basically, was irritated, agitated because of the presence of God in that particular meeting. The next day I phoned up the leader of the prayer group to explain what I thought of the group, which wasn't going to be very nice, but I only babbled down the phone. I wasn't able to speak coherently. And later that day, I phoned her just to apologise as I came to my senses a little bit. And as I did, she just said to me, she had the presence of mind and the presence of spirit to say, Aidan, did you say that you're a healer? I said, I did. She said, I have someone that might be able to help you with that. Would you like to meet him? I said I would. You see, I had been looking for quite some time. I had been looking for help for quite some time, but nobody would help. I had made various approaches, but nobody challenged me in terms of what I was doing. So that evening, I followed her in the car, in my own car, up to a place in Castledermot. And there was a priest there, Father Leo McAuliffe, a Capuchin priest. And I went into him for the first time back into confession in many, many, many years. And I explained to him what I was doing. And he was a man with a beard, and he just stroked the beard for a moment. And he looked up at me and he says, Aidan, you've gone up the wrong road. Now you've a choice to make. The choice is to come down off the wide road that you're on right now, which is not going to bring you any good, and to go up the narrow road to Jesus. And through the grace of God, I made confession that night. I was given absolution, and then I came out and I was prayed with by the prayer team. And interestingly, and it's just relevant to some of what we might talk about a little later, one of the prayer team actually prophesied to me. Mary was her name. She's gone to the Lord now. And she said, if you cooperate and walk with the Lord, he'll bring you all over the world. And he has. But anyway, that night was over. I arrived home and my wife was waiting for me. I had my mother-in-law in the kitchen. Well, and I explained what had happened. And then my wife said to me, and what about the courses and the books? And my response, but I can't give up all that. The Lord surely wouldn't want me to waste all that money. And she said, and you have to. And this just went back and forth for what seemed like an eternity, but it was only for a few moments. And eventually I just reached over, I picked up the phone. I pulled out of the NLP program. I pulled out of the other program that I'd been involved in to be trained as in light working and related areas like that. I just said, no, I'm finished. And I just distinctly remember the fear in the voice of the woman that was training me to be a light worker, the fear. I just could, for a long time afterwards, she'd lost a soul. She'd lost a soul for Satan. And by the way, Satan does exist. Hell does exist. These are the realities of our faith, and it's not just our faith as Christians, it is a truth. Because there's no boundaries out there in terms of, as C.S. Lewis just explains, that the entire universe is inhabited. It's either for God, and it's the opposing forces trying to pull away from God, the entire universe. But anyway, I cancelled that. I came down to this office. I took every book, tape, CD, there was a hole out the back, and I burned everything. And I destroyed everything. The pendulum, I destroyed it, got rid of it. And just through the grace of God, I went back a couple more times just to that particular group. And eventually the priest said to me, Aidan, this is not the place for you. And he sent me to Ratho, County Carlow, not County Meath, but Ratho, to a man called Noel Byrne, no relation. And I joined St. Patrick's Prayer Group in the autumn of 2007. And I'm still there, a member of the group. It's run by Noel and Eileen Byrne for coming up on over 30 years now at this stage. And I work closely with Noel in the Ministry of Healing and Liberation. And just in that, within a short time, I was out there, just began sharing with people. The first place I actually gave a sharing, just on the testimony I've just shared with you now, was in Knock. And but I just remember just distinctly that the tremendous anger amongst some people when you begin speaking against these particular areas, because it is so deeply rooted basically within their lives, and because of the conflict that goes on basically within their hearts because of what they're involved in themselves.
Why would they be angry?
It's the conflict between the Spirit of God and the Spirit of the world. And when you open your life up in any way to any of these areas, there's a cloud comes down as such, a veil that comes down. I did say earlier, just in relation to the book of Romans, and it's just maybe it would help if I just went back in here just for a moment and just looked at this. Claiming to be wise, I'm in Romans chapter 1 from verse 22 down. Actually, I'll go back to verse 20. So they are without excuse, for although they knew God, they did not honour him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their senseless minds were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, or birds, or animals, or reptiles. And all you have to do is go once into any of these practices, and what you've done is you've actually broken the first commandment, which brings a 4-generational curse with it.
We have come to the end of the program for this evening. Please tune in next week at the same time, when I will continue my conversation with Aidan. Remember, you can hear the replay of this interview and all our interviews on christianmediatrust.ie. Good evening, and God bless you.